It sounds like the monarchy will be shifting in a slightly different direction.
I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good.
The doors of Buckingham Palace opened, and in that single moment, the British monarchy shifted on its axis. No fanfare. No rehearsed smile for the cameras. No ceremonial pause to acknowledge the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. Prince William, or rather, King William, simply walked forward. And in doing so, he communicated everything the palace had spent months carefully preparing the world to understand. Those inside the hall saw it first. A stillness fell over the room. Not the reverent hush of ceremony, but something sharper, the silence of people recalibrating in real time. Because what stood before them was not a prince stepping nervously into an unfamiliar role. It was a man who had clearly already been occupying that role, quietly, deliberately, for a very long time. For Camilla's wider family, the Parker Bowles circle that had, over 2 decades, built a carefully cultivated proximity to the crown, that silence carried an entirely different weight. The warmth they had come to rely on, the unspoken access granted by King Charles's deep personal loyalties, the soft influence Camilla had quietly woven through the fabric of royal life, all of it suddenly felt fragile. Not broken, not yet, but unmistakably fragile. This is the story of that moment. What led to it, what it revealed, and what it signals for the future of the British monarchy under a king who has spent years watching, learning, and planning, and who is now, finally, ready to act. To understand the weight of William's first appearance, you first need to understand how long he had been preparing for it, not in theory, but in practice. When Buckingham Palace confirmed in February 2024 that King Charles III had been diagnosed with cancer, the official statement was carefully worded, measured in its reassurances, and deliberately vague about the precise nature of the illness. What it did not, could not, conceal was the institutional reality. The working monarch was stepping back from public duties. Somebody had to fill that space. That somebody was William. According to reporting from The Guardian and the BBC at the time, Prince William began absorbing a significantly expanded portfolio of royal engagements almost immediately following the announcement. State correspondence, meetings with senior advisors, ceremonial representations that would ordinarily fall to the sovereign. These responsibilities flowed quietly, steadily, toward Kensington Palace. There was no dramatic transfer of power. There was no public declaration. There was simply William, showing up, doing the work, and doing it with a precision that surprised even those who had watched him closely for years. Royal biographer Robert Jobson, whose book Our King, Charles III and the Future of the Monarchy offered one of the more authoritative accounts of this transition period, described the atmosphere inside royal circles as one of careful, almost surgical preparation. William was not being handed a role. He was growing into one he had been quietly constructing for himself since at least the early 2010s. Since the years when he first began pushing back against the more ceremonial, distant model of royal engagement that had defined his father's generation. The transformation was visible to those paying attention. William's speeches became more direct, less hedged by the careful diplomatic language that royal figures typically deploy as a kind of protective shield. His public engagements grew more targeted, less about appearing at ribbon cuttings and more about substantive conversations around homelessness, mental health, and environmental sustainability through his Earthshot Prize initiative. He was, in the language of modern leadership theory, focused on outcomes rather than optics. By the time Charles's illness made a formal transition of authority not merely likely but necessary, William had already internalized the role. The coronation, when it eventually came, would be less a beginning than a public acknowledgement of something that had, in practical terms, already happened. This matters enormously when trying to understand the mood in that palace hall. Because when William walked through those doors, the people who knew the institution best, the senior aides, the long-serving courtiers, the advisors who had navigated multiple reigns, were not watching someone arrive. They were watching someone confirm. To understand what was lost in that moment, and for whom, you need to understand what had been built over the preceding 2 decades. Camilla Parker Bowles's journey from the most controversial figure in the British royal family to Queen Camilla is one of the more remarkable rehabilitations in modern public life. When she and Charles married in April 2005, public opinion polls showed significant opposition to the union. By the time of Charles's coronation in May 2023, that same public had largely accepted, even, in many quarters, embraced, her presence beside the king. The shift was the product of patient, disciplined image management, genuine public service, and the simple passage of time. But Camilla's integration into royal life was never purely personal. It brought with it her own family, her children from her first marriage, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopez, along with their children. These were not figures thrust into royal prominence. They were, for the most part, people who maintained independent careers and relatively private lives. Tom built a respected career as a food writer and critic. Laura worked in the art world. They were not royals, but they moved, with increasing comfort, within royal circles. According to reporting from the Times and various royal correspondents over the years, the Parker Bowles family attended private gatherings at royal residences, appeared at significant ceremonial occasions, and enjoyed the kind of quiet, informal access to the palace ecosystem that money cannot purchase and titles do not automatically confer. This access was, at its core, personal. It flowed directly from Charles's deep and enduring love for Camilla, and from his instinct, consistent throughout his reign, to keep those closest to him close. Royal protocol analyst and author Marlene Koenig, who has written extensively on the mechanics of palace access and royal household dynamics, has observed in various commentaries that the British monarchy operates on two parallel tracks simultaneously. There is the formal, institutional track, the official engagements, the state functions, the constitutional duties that are publicly documented and rigidly structured. And then there is the informal track, the private dinners, the shooting weekends at Sandringham, the quiet conversations that shape decisions long before they appear in any official record. The Parker Bowles family had, over 2 decades, secured a meaningful foothold on that informal track. Not because they had engineered it cynically, but because they were family to the man who held the crown. The vulnerability of that position was always structural, even if it rarely felt urgent during Charles's active reign. Access built on personal loyalty rather than institutional role is, by definition, contingent on the person who grants it. When that person is no longer the center of power, the access does not automatically transfer. It must be renegotiated, or it dissolves. William's appearance as king was the moment that structural vulnerability became viscerally, undeniably real. No honest account of the current transformation within the British monarchy can avoid the central role being played by Catherine, Princess of Wales, soon to be Queen Catherine. Her influence on William's approach to kingship is not incidental. By multiple credible accounts, including reporting from both Hello magazine's royal correspondents and more serious analyses published in the Times and the Sunday Times, Catherine functions as what one might describe as the strategic intelligence of the partnership. William brings the authority, the weight of direct succession, and an increasingly confident public presence. Catherine brings a remarkable capacity for long-term institutional thinking, emotional intelligence, and the kind of grounded perspective that comes from having entered the royal family as an outsider. Her background is frequently cited in this context. Unlike previous generations of royal consorts drawn primarily from aristocratic families, Catherine grew up in a solidly upper-middle-class household in Berkshire. Her parents built a successful business. She attended Marlborough College and the University of St. Andrews, where she met William. But she was not born into the assumptions and entitlements of established aristocracy. She had to learn the institution from the outside in, and that learning process gave her a perspective on what the monarchy looks like to ordinary people that is genuinely rare within palace walls. That perspective, observers suggest, has increasingly shaped the direction of William's thinking on what a modern monarchy should look like. The emphasis on fewer, more meaningful public engagements rather than a relentless schedule of symbolic appearances. The focus on causes with measurable outcomes, mental health, early childhood development, environmental sustainability. The preference for communication that feels direct and authentic over the carefully managed distance that once characterized royal public relations. Catherine's own health journey has added another dimension to her public standing. Her announcement in March 2024 that she had been diagnosed with cancer and was undergoing preventative chemotherapy was met with an outpouring of public sympathy and support that cut across the usual divisions of opinion about the royal family. Her video statement, filmed in the garden of the family's Adelaide cottage home at Windsor, was widely praised for its directness and dignity. Her subsequent return to public duties, gradual, carefully paced, but unmistakably determined, reinforced an image of quiet personal strength that has considerably deepened her standing with the British public. Within the palace, her recovery and return carried additional significance. It demonstrated, those close to the couple suggest, an even tighter alignment between her and William on the direction they intend to take. The months of reduced public presence, of focused private life, of stripped-back engagements, appear to have produced not retreat but renewed clarity of purpose. The implications for existing palace dynamics are significant. For those whose position within the royal circle depended on Camilla's influence and Charles's personal warmth, Catherine represents a genuinely different calculus. She does not operate on sentiment. She is reported to assess relationships and arrangements in terms of what they contribute to the institution's long-term health and public standing. And she is, those close to her suggest, entirely prepared to allow arrangements that no longer serve that purpose to quietly lapse. The clearest window into William's leadership philosophy, more revealing than any speech, any interview, any carefully managed public appearance, has been his handling of the question of Prince Andrew. The Duke of York's position within the royal family has been, since his disastrous 2019 BBC Newsnight interview about his relationship with the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, a source of sustained institutional damage. Andrew stepped back from royal duties in November 2019, but the question of his ongoing residence at Royal Lodge, a substantial property on the Windsor estate, his retention of his HRH title, and the broader question of how the institution manages his continued presence has remained unresolved. According to reporting from multiple royal correspondents, including the BBC's royal correspondent Johnny Diamond and Omid Scobie, whose 2023 book Endgame provided significant detail on internal palace dynamics, William's position on Andrew has been unambiguous. The Duke should have no public role, no official platform, and his residential arrangements at Royal Lodge, which requires significant royal funding to maintain, should be brought to a conclusion. Charles's position, by multiple accounts, was more conflicted. The instinct toward personal loyalty, toward family over institution, toward finding solutions that minimized visible conflict, these are characteristic of Charles's approach to difficult decisions throughout his public life. He delayed, negotiated, sought middle grounds that William reportedly viewed as insufficient and ultimately counterproductive. The contrast in approach is instructive. It is not, those who have observed both men suggest, a difference of values. Both Charles and William share a genuine commitment to the monarchy's survival and to its public service function. The difference is methodological. Charles's instinct is to manage difficult situations through relationship maintenance, through patience, through the gradual building of consensus. William's instinct is to establish clear principles and enforce them consistently, even when doing so creates friction. Royal historian Dr. Anna Whitelock, whose work on British royal history spans multiple centuries and is recognized as authoritative within academic circles, has observed in public commentary that the monarchs who have most successfully navigated periods of institutional challenge have generally been those willing to prioritize the institution's long-term credibility over short-term personal relationships. The model here, analysts suggest, is less Charles and more the approach that defined the latter years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign, a queen who, for all her warmth and personal loyalty, was ultimately willing to make hard institutional calls when they became unavoidable. William appears to have internalized that lesson early, and it shapes everything about how his reign is beginning to take for the relationship between Queen Camilla and the next generation of the royal family, William and Catherine, has been one of the more carefully managed ongoing narratives within palace communications for the past decade. The official line has consistently emphasized mutual respect, shared commitment to public service, and harmonious coordination between households. The reality, according to multiple sources speaking to various royal correspondents over the years, has been considerably more textured. Camilla's position within the monarchy has always rested on a specific and somewhat unusual foundation. She is queen by virtue of her marriage to Charles. Her formal constitutional role is real but limited. Her actual influence has derived primarily from her personal relationship with the king, from the fact that for Charles, she was, as his public declaration made clear, the person he had always loved. That foundation, formidable while Charles was the active monarch, becomes structurally different in a reign defined by William and Catherine. Camilla's formal position as queen, or queen mother, as the title would eventually shift, is secure. The personal dynamics that gave that position its informal weight are not automatically transferable. Reporting from royal correspondent Rebecca English in the Daily Mail, one of the more consistently well-sourced observers of palace dynamics, has described a growing distance between the two households in the months preceding and following Charles's stepping back from active duties. Schedules coordinated to minimize unnecessary friction. Communication routed increasingly through staff channels rather than directly. A studied, careful professionalism replacing the warmer, more informal exchanges that had characterized the relationship during Charles's more active years. The state visit described by insiders as particularly revealing, in which Catherine moved through formal engagements with an ease and authority that drew observers' attention and prompted what multiple sources described as visible discomfort from Camilla's side, is illustrative of a broader dynamic. William and Catherine are not, those close to them suggest, seeking confrontation with Camilla. They are simply defining their own vision of what the monarchy should be, and that vision is being implemented with a consistency and confidence that leaves limited space for negotiation. For Camilla personally, this represents a genuinely challenging adjustment. She spent decades navigating public hostility, institutional resistance, and the particular pressures of her relationship with Charles before finally arriving at a position of security and respect. To find that position now subject to forces she cannot control, not hostile, but simply indifferent to the informal network she built, is, by accounts of those close to her, deeply unsettling. What does William actually intend to build? The outlines have emerged clearly enough from a combination of public statements, reporting from trusted royal correspondents, and the pattern of decisions he has made over the past several years. In an interview during a visit to South Africa, William spoke with unusual directness about his vision for the institution. Tradition, he acknowledged, carries real value. It embodies continuity, connects present to past, and provides the monarchy with a depth and weight that purely modern institutions lack. But tradition must, in his view, be interrogated rather than simply inherited. The question is not whether something has always been done, but whether it continues to serve a genuine purpose. This is not empty rhetoric. The Earthshot Prize, launched in 2020 and modeled partly on the ambition of the U.S. space program's moonshot mentality, represents William's most visible attempt to demonstrate what purposeful royal engagement looks like in the 21st century. Rather than simply lending his name to a cause, William committed to building a genuine infrastructure, rigorous selection processes, substantial prize funding, serious scientific and policy credibility around environmental solutions. The prize has attracted genuine attention and respect within sustainability circles internationally. Rebecca English's reporting in the Daily Mail has indicated that planning for a streamlined monarchy is well advanced, a structure with fewer working royals, reduced ceremonial apparatus, and a sharper focus on a smaller number of high-impact causes. Shorter coronation ceremonies. More accessible public engagements. A significant review of the royal warrant system, which grants the royal family's formal endorsement to commercial suppliers and has long been considered due for modernization. The underlying philosophy, as those close to William describe it, is one of accountability. An institution that seeks public support, whether through formal funding mechanisms or simply through public goodwill and perceived relevance, must demonstrate that it earns that support through visible contribution. Pageantry alone, however magnificent, is no longer sufficient justification for the monarchy's place in British national life. Increasingly, the argument must be made in terms of tangible public value. This represents a meaningful departure from previous models. Not from Charles's genuine commitment to public service. His work through the Prince's Trust and various charitable initiatives was substantive and should not be underestimated, but from the broader institutional assumption that the monarchy's value is self-evident and its continuity self-justifying. William, it appears, believes the monarchy must make its case anew for each generation. And he intends to make it persuasively. Any account of William's vision for the monarchy must include Prince George, because William's decisions are being shaped not only by what the institution needs now, but by what he wants to hand his son. Prince George, born in July 2013, is now the heir apparent. He has been raised, by all credible accounts, with a conscious intention to prepare him for the role without burdening him with it prematurely. William and Catherine have been public about their commitment to providing their children with as normal a childhood as the constraints of their position allow. Schools in Windsor rather than palace tutors, holidays that resemble those of ordinary British families, deliberate protection from the more intrusive aspects of public life. This is not merely personal preference. It reflects a considered view about what kind of future king will best serve both the institution and the public. The model of remote, formally educated, carefully isolated royal upbringings produced monarchs ill-equipped to relate to the everyday realities of the people they served. William and Catherine's approach is designed to produce something different, an heir who carries the authority and dignity of his position without losing the capacity for genuine human connection. For the monarchy to survive and thrive across the 21st century and beyond, it will need to maintain its relevance to an increasingly diverse, educated, and skeptical public. George's upbringing is, in this sense, a long-term institutional investment, a bet that a future king who understands ordinary life from direct experience will be better equipped to lead an institution that must ultimately derive its authority from public consent. Catherine, as Queen, will play a central role in shaping that continuity. Her transition from Princess of Wales to Queen Consort to eventually being simply known as Queen in public life marks a line of institutional evolution that William has clearly thought through with considerable care. The partnership they represent, grounded, purposeful, genuinely collaborative, is intended to be the model, not merely for their own reign, but for what follows. Return, at the end, to that moment in the palace hall. The doors opening. William walking forward. The silence that fell and the different things it meant to different people in that room. For the senior courtiers who had spent months watching William quietly absorb the responsibilities of kingship, it was confirmation. Nothing unexpected. Simply the public acknowledgement of a reality they had already been living. For the journalists and photographers present, it was the image they had been waiting for, a visual that captured something intangible and yet unmistakable about a generational transition. For the Parker Bowles family, and for Camilla herself, it was something more complicated. Not hostility. Not deliberate exclusion. Simply the plain, quiet reality that the warmth and personal loyalty that had given their palace access its solidity was now no longer the organizing principle of the institution. Power had moved. And it had moved, this time, without sentiment. The monarchy William is building is leaner, sharper, more deliberate and less forgiving of arrangements that no longer serve a clear institutional purpose. It values outcomes over symbolism, accountability over assumption, and public trust over private loyalty. It is, in many ways, a more demanding monarchy, demanding of itself, demanding of those who operate within its orbit, and demanding in its insistence that every element of the institution justify its place. Whether this vision succeeds will depend on many things beyond William's control. The temperament of a public that remains genuinely uncertain about the monarchy's long-term future, the political pressures that will inevitably shape the institution's relationship with government, and the unpredictable developments that no amount of careful planning can entirely anticipate. But what that moment in the palace hall made unmistakably clear is that William is not drifting toward the throne. He is moving toward it with intention, with a plan, and with a clarity of purpose that the British monarchy has rarely seen expressed with quite this degree of quiet, confident authority.